Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
There were giants in the earth in those days. Many of us Christians think that that is a fringe subject when it comes to the study of our faith, but in fact, we are finding as we study more about ancient history and cosmology that it is central to the narrative of the Bible and the supernatural war in which you are deployed. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Thank you for watching at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, or if you're listening at whether it's VFTB.net, Spreaker, Stitcher, or wherever else fine podcasts are sold, we thank you for joining us today. Our guest is a gentleman who has been studying the giants of old for quite some time, did his doctoral dissertation on the religious history of a site at the foot of Mount Hermon, which, of course, if you've been listening to this program or watching this program for any length of time, you know was where the Watchers descended in the days of Jared and began their plot to corrupt humanity. His first book was Interview with the Giant, Ethno-Historical Notes on the Nephilim, and he is getting ready to release more information, a series of essays collected under the title The Nephilim Dossier, more ethno-historical materials on the ancient giants. It is our honor to welcome our friend back to the program, Dr. Judd Burton. Judd, welcome.
Thank you, Derek. Good to be here.
This is a topic that we've explored often on this program. In fact, there's some places out there where you'll find comments to this podcast accusing me of being obsessed with the Nephilim. I don't call it an obsession, but the more I study this topic, the more I realize there is an importance to the Nephilim and the Rephaim, who I believe are one and the same, and biblical theology than we ever realized before. What are you finding, and how does this relate to our walk as Christians? Why is this important to us?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, this guy, Derek emails me constantly, he calls me constantly wanting to get me on, and I got classes to teach.
Trying to do a show about the giants every single week. I know. I have
every single week. It's like I'm his personal consultant on the issue. I'm kidding. I'm having fun. We're drinking our coffee, we're drinking our tea, enjoying the simple pleasures.
Yeah.
But getting back to your question. It's interesting the accusations that get thrown out about studying this sorts of material, because would you call somebody who is a specialist in apologetics or Pauline literature, Johannine literature, or
obsessed with Paul, obsessed with John? Yeah.
Would you call one of those guys obsessed? It's the specialization, just like any other specialization. To me, the argument just sort of ends there. Now, can that focus go off in different directions that can be considered tangential to even the study of giants? Well, of course. If things don't line up theologically, historically, anthropologically, archaeologically with the biblical narrative, yeah, then you got some problems.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that those of us who are really committed to this subject try our best to not veer off into the periphery of something that's already considered by many people to be a fringe topic. That is to say, we're actually trying to, maybe not explicitly, but in our own ways, we're trying to develop guidelines and prerequisites and things that we agree upon in moving this thing towards a sub-discipline or whatever title that you want to attach to it, which is it has quickly become its own discipline within biblical studies, biblical history, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's kind of the direction that I've taken with this, the Nephilim dossier, is to build up more materials based on the same approach that I used in Interview with the Giant, but try and articulate some of the elements of where this discipline may be going.
It's and at the end of the day, of course, it all comes back to Christ and Him crucified. So if it isn't, if that
Absolutely.
isn't ultimately where we end up, then yeah, we are just engaging in a sort of an academic exercise for its own enjoyment, which is fun, but ultimately not edifying for the body of Christ or for those in need of salvation, which is 100% of the world's population. So we've got that, but I think a lot of people yet fail to see why this is a relevant topic. I mean, kudos to Dr. Michael Heiser for reversing Hermann, which showed the influence of Enochic literature and which was, of course, inspired by the incident on Mount Hermon, the Mesopotamian Apkallu, the Watchers, and the evil that they wrought upon the earth, showing the influence of that on New Testament theology. In other words, Christian doctrine was really influenced and, in a sense, shaped by what happened on Mount Hermon back in the days of Enoch. So what are you finding, and what sort of directions is your research leading you these days?
Well, what you said is all very true. You and I have talked on a number of occasions about the episode at Caesarea Philippi, and just how the setting would have been such a huge impact on the audience that Jesus had there.
Yeah, that's the grotto of Pan, and the question that he asked Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" Yes,
yeah, the establishment of the church, the gates of hell will not. To me, it's like pins in a lock falling into place, at least to some extent. But again, the direction that a lot of my work has taken, I'll probably over the last year and a half, is again trying to articulate the materials toward a kind of scientific giantology, which again, most of us are serious about this, try and stay within the confines of, certain parameters. But this is a substantive topic, like you say, it's not as if you can read through the biblical narrative without running into the issue of giants, the occurrence of giants, their various tribes and clans, and their forebears, the sons of God, the Watchers, the Egregori. So it's not as if this is some sort of fantastical rhapsody that we've all chosen to enter into. They're avocational scholars and lettered people alike who've committed serious research time and resource to trying to illuminate, trying to cast some sort of clarity on an issue that can be very problematic and very confusing, and not a stumbling block to biblical studies, but a challenge. You always need these things. I will always run into things in the Bible that challenge us, and that's a good thing, because it like the word says, it causes us to prove ourselves by study. That's a discipline of the faith. It's not just something that's just made up. I like what Steve Quayle said one time. He called the giants and the material surrounding them kind of the Rosetta Stone of the Bible. They do make
that's a really good way of putting it.
Portions of the Bible, come to life and less obscure, particularly during the period of the conquest and for years after too.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the direction that my work has been taking again has been largely to articulate a science of giantology, and I've got a whole other book that's going to be devoted to that, probably hoping to finish that within the year. But there are all kinds of issues like certainly the biblical narrative is the grounding point, but if we're going to look at these things in a real space in real time, and chart their culture, so to speak, as I've tried to do, using largely anthropological tools, then there are other considerations that we need to make room for, such as taxonomy, such as curation.
Now, explain the term taxonomy to listeners and to me.
Well, taxonomy is the scientific cataloging system that we've developed over the last 300 years or so for organizing all living life, essentially.
Okay, so Homo sapiens, and then how do we classify giants?
Right. Yeah, most everybody's familiar with the scientific name of a number of species, Homo sapiens, sapiens being the one for humans. Mm-hmm. And there are all kinds of scientific. That's the genus and the species name. There are all kinds of designations for all plant and animal life that you could possibly imagine. I suppose you could say that Adam was the first taxonomist. He was given the job of naming animals, but in terms of our modern system of taxonomy, the one that's used by academia, that really goes back to a fellow by the name of Carl Linnaeus. He sort of developed this system that we have today, and we continue to use it. And it's handy, but again, there's part of the questioning here. Part of the investigation should be, ostensibly, if we produce through archaeology physical remains and are able to discern from their physiology, their morphology, let's say a number of different variations on a theme, mm-hmm. To just use vernacular, where do they fit into the fossil record? Where do they fit into, can they fit into the fossil record?
Well, I guess that's a bigger question, and that leads to the question I was going to ask you about taxonomy. The Latin names, the scientific names that we give to creatures, are based on what we can observe, either living or dead specimens, and yet to this point, there hasn't been there haven't been any agreed upon specimens that we can classify as separate species, any separate giant species. So, how do we develop a taxonomy for something that we have not yet recognized, or at least there's no scientific consensus that these things even exist?
Well, again, we're almost I read an article the other day about exoarchaeology or xenoarchaeology, which is the hypothetical science of archaeology on other planets. If we send out an exploratory expedition to some other planet, ostensibly one of the crew members is going to be an anthropologist, archaeologist, and exoarchaeology or xenoarchaeology is the hypothetical science of doing that on other planets. But there have been a number of papers. In fact, in the journal Space Policy, I read one the other day about dated 2011, I think is when it came out. The guy's name is Ben McGraw, I believe. But it talked about the various guidelines. What would this look like? If it was a subdiscipline of archaeology, what would it look like? And there were issues, brought up like taxonomy and artifactual typology, that sort of thing. And so, in kind of the same way, I don't want to use the word musing because I don't think that that's what it is. But in kind of the same way, you have to develop potential issues and potential research problems, if you will, in order to begin building the pieces of a scientific giantology, part of that would be the taxonomic question. It may require an entirely new, thinking of how we would apply taxonomy to something like giants, because, again, ostensibly, depending on what generation of giants they are, they're going to have this more, they're going to have a stronger supernatural component, because of their pedigree.
Mm-hmm. Well, now let's dig into that just a little bit. And by the way, just as a quick aside, I think it's funny that scholars, mainstream academia, are willing to consider theoretical disciplines like exoarchaeology, and they're offering degrees in astrobiology, which our friend, the late Chris Putnam, described as a specialists in a science that doesn't even exist, because as far as we know, we've not yet found any life in outer space, and yet there are astrobiologists out there who are gainfully employed. What do you mean when you say generations of giants? I mean, I've dug into the Book of Enoch a little bit and found the new the Hermenia translation by George W. Nicholsburg to be really helpful.
He's great. Yeah, he's fantastic.
Haven't dug into his commentary yet, but his translation of the Book of Enoch is phenomenal, because he collates the existing texts, of which there are many that have been found on various parts of the planet, and put them together into one new translation. Doesn't substantially change things, but one of the things that is different from the old R.H. Charles translation that most of us are familiar with is the identity of different generations of giants, including something I'd never heard of before called the Eliud. So what are you talking about here? Is that what you mean when you say the generations of giants, and how do we categorize them?
Yeah, I'm talking about different time periods. Antediluvian giants, post-flood giants, like the tribes and clans that are mentioned in the Old Testament.
Okay, the Emim, Zanzumim, Anakim, and so forth. Yep,
exactly. Because I believe that there was a diaspora of giants into the rest of the world in the beginning in the late Bronze and early Iron Ages. You're looking, with each generation born, especially if there's intermarriage with humans, or intermating with humans, then you're going to have a degradation. That's ostensibly you're going to have that degradation of the supernatural element that goes back to the original angelic pedigree.
Right. And to timestamp things for people not familiar with those terms, the late Bronze, early Iron Age, that would be about 1000 BC, about the time of King David?
1200 BC is usually the watermark start of the Iron Age. So that's
the time of the judges.
That's sort of general.
Yeah, the time of the judges, about the time that Gideon and his 300 were defeating the Midianites and so forth.
Right,
Yeah.
And listeners can sort of look at since Goliath was one of the last ditch attempts to try and destroy the bloodline of the Messiah. You can sort of look at that as the kind of the signal for giants to clear out. But you do see a number of waves of diasporas even before that.
Yeah. And by the way, I ask about the timing there because I know this is something I had to learn as I was researching The Great Inception. I had to go back and keep looking it up again and again and again and again until I finally got it. Bronze Age. Okay. Somewhere. And as you can see, I still got it wrong. I was off by a couple hundred years. So anyway.
Well, generally speaking, you were right. But the watermark date that I always use is 1200 BC.
Okay. Which coincides with the Sea People's invasion, by the way, which is the Philistines and their allies basically coming from the Aegean, which is the sea between Greece and Turkey, and destroying the Hittite Empire, destroying Ugarit, which was that Amorite Canaanite kingdom on the coast of Syria, from which we get so many texts that have been so helpful.
Right. There was a big shakeup in the Aegean with the decline of Minoan civilization.
Right.
The explosion on Thera changed everything in the Aegean, and as the Minoans declined, the Mycenaeans sort of stepped in, and when their time they enjoyed the Trojan War, their spoils from the Trojan War for a little while, and then here come the sea people.
Yeah, and established the Philistine colonies down there in the Gaza Strip, basically Gaza, Ashdod, Gath, and it's not coincidental that in the wrap-up, sort of the summary of the conquest of Canaan in Joshua chapter 11, they focused their attention on the Anakim, who were one of the Rephaim tribes, who come from the Nephilim, according to the spies, Numbers 13:33.
Sure.
So, yeah, that was significant, and significant, too, that they mentioned that nowhere in Israel were there any of the Anakim left, only in Gath, which, of course, is where Goliath came from a couple hundred years later, about 400 years later.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But
it was the Sea Peoples were they were Jack Sparrow and his crew. They're a bunch of ne'er-do-well pirates. But that's a transitional period for a lot of things in the ancient world.
Yeah, and the Trojan War, which a lot of us think was just mythical, apparently now a lot of scholars have come to believe, okay, no, there was a real deal there. That was on the west coast of what is now Turkey. At about that time.
Yeah. There's not only the
Troy has been
decades
found.
of archaeology that's been conducted, but we actually have Hittite records that mention by name some of the prominent figures in the Trojan War.
Yeah, which is phenomenal. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's one of the themes I'm exploring in my next book, the overlap. If you were to draw a Venn diagram, Greek mythology and Canaanite cosmology and Sumerian cosmology, there's a lot of overlap between those three.
Oh my, yes, yeah, a lot, yeah.
Well, now let's talk about that a little bit because I think most of us are the product of education that was based on the assumption that what the Greeks and Romans adopted as religion, their mythology, and it's usually taught to us in high school, or at least it was for me, as though it was just, like Aesop's fables. Okay, these are the stories Greek and Roman moms and dads taught their kids to teach them to be good. No, it was their religion. And there was sort of an assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that there was an assumption that all of this grew out of Indo-European culture, that there was no origin in the Levant or the ancient Near East, Sumer, Babylonia, Acadia, the Assyria, that had nothing to do with it. The fact that the chief god of the pantheon of the Canaanites and the Greeks happened to be the storm god and shared a holy mountain there in what is now modern Turkey. That was just coincidence.
Right.
It seems like that's been flipped on its head with modern scholarship, that it's pretty clear that what the Greeks and the Romans adopted came straight out of Babel.
Sure, and ultimately, I don't know that the Indo-European material and the Near Eastern material need to be mutually exclusive. Because,
no.
Indo-European scholars like J.P. Mallory and Marios Gimbutas wrote extensively about this triad of deities that was pretty universal amongst Indo-European. When we say Indo-European, we're talking about peoples thousands of years ago that were steppe tribes in Central Asia. And many of the languages of Europe and Asia, in fact, most of them descend in some way from the various waves of migration from Central Asia. But yeah, one of these sort of archetype gods was a sky god that the Indo-Europeans worship. And he for the longest time, the idea was that Zeus, since we're looking at Greek mythology, would have been the interpretation of that sky god in Greece, and in India it would have been Indra, and amongst the Romans it would have been Jupiter. But in terms of the Near Eastern influence is there as well. If anything, it was confirmation that they were all worshiping the same original gods. That those of us in the the Giantology community have been writing about to one degree or another. So whether we're talking about Bel Hadad amongst the Canaanites, or this nebulous sky deity that the Indo-Europeans worshipped, and their later descendants, the Greeks and the Romans, I think ultimately we're talking about the same. It kind of comes full circle. We're talking about the same sky deity that seems to sit at the top of these pantheons. But building on that, it's also it's a quantifiable thing. It's not something that's just been hypothesized. That there have been several periods, 2 main periods, in fact, of what scholars call Orientalizing from the ancient Near East, this influence on the Aegean world, on the Greek world. One is during the Mycenaean period, and of course there are other smaller ones because there's a lot of traffic between the Aegean, a lot of trade, a lot of money to be made. In fact, whoever controlled in the ancient Aegean period, when the Minoans and the Mycenaeans were around, whoever controlled that traffic was top dog.
And the Minoans were on
King Minos.
The Minoans were on the island of Crete or Cyprus.
On the island of Crete. They had colonies. They had outlying colonies in the islands of the Aegean, and if memory serves, they did have a presence on Cyprus.
Okay.
But the myth of King Minos talks about Minos had to exact a tribute from the mainland of 7 young men and 7 virgins to feed to the Minotaur. Well, that may actually have been a real thing, but it may also speak to the fact that the Minoans were politically and economically dominant in the Aegean. But neither here nor there. The point that I'm trying to make is that there are very chartable, quantifiable periods of this influence on Greek culture, Hellenic culture, and even the older Aegean civilization culture from the ancient Near East. A good piece to look at are the kinds of redware that were produced during the colonization periods and the Archaic period in Greek history, which would have been between about 800 BC and about 500 BC. The Athenians and the Corinthians, all the city-states were kind of in competition with one another. But one of the main products that all of them made was this stuff called redware. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of all-purpose pottery, people bought it all the time. But the Corinthian stuff was slightly more popular, and it was the most successful selling product of the period, if you will. And it was a little more exotic because you would find elements of Near Eastern mythology in its artwork. You'd find cherubs and sphinxes and bullmen and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of this influence of the ancient Near East on the Greek world.
One of the things I find, sorry to interrupt, but I want to jump off from this, the mention of the Minotaur and the bullmen on this artwork, because that's one of the aspects of the research I've been doing. And this gets us back to the old gods and also then jumps back to the giants.
Sure.
The sky god or the storm god at the top of the pantheon in Canaan, Baal or Hadad, Zeus in Greece, Jupiter in Rome, but also in other places in the Hittite or Hurrian civilization, which was Indo-European in what is essentially now northern Assyria and Armenia, had to defeat a sky god that preceded, or rather a grain god. With Jupiter, it was Saturn. With Zeus, it was Kronos. In Baal, in the Canaanite culture, the Baal cycle, you don't see it explicitly, but you do see that the chief god or the creator god of the Canaanite pantheon, El, whose mount of assembly was on Mount Hermon, incidentally, had tried to pass the kingship to other sons of El. And Baal, interestingly, in the Canaanite pantheon is called son of Dagon. So the El, so you get this tension because El apparently didn't want Hadad or Baal to become the king of the gods, but rather preferred Yam, the god of the ocean, or Mot, the god of death. And Baal had to battle both of them to win the kingship away from them. But in the Greek, cosmology, of course, Zeus went to war with Kronos and the Titans and condemned them by sending them down to Tartarus, where they were imprisoned. In the Hurrian civilization, the storm god Teshub had to battle Kumarbi, who was the grain god, and sent him down. The Hurrians and the Hittites had this concept of former gods. In fact, in the Hittite civilization, they called the cosmology, they called them the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki were the former gods who were now judges in the netherworld, which even in Babylonian cosmology was the ultimate destiny of the Anunnaki. They had originally been the great gods of the pantheon, but by the time of the Babylonian kingdom, founded by Amorites, Hammurabi the Great, the Anunnaki were judges of the underworld. So you had this pattern repeated where younger gods would overthrow older gods.
Right.
In the Greek cosmology, and I focus on this a lot because they were the closest civilization to the Canaanites, Kronos, whose name, according to Ugaritic scholar Nicholas Wyatt, University of Edinburgh, points out may have a bovid origin, because the Hebrew word Keren, Qeren, may be the origin of the name Kronos, which indicates, bull-like or horns.
Isn't that interesting? Because if the syllabic element there is steady, then you've got horned deities like Cernunnos in Celtic mythology.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
I wanted to interject that because that's very interesting.
Yeah, in the Ugaritic, the word is the cognate to the Hebrew Keren is Karnu, Qarnu. So again, as this was transliterated and adopted by the Aegean people, the Greeks, far to the west, it's possible that this name may have been transliterated into Kronos. Now, scholars agree that Kronos is a cognate, same position in the pantheon as El in the Canaanite pantheon, who is referred to in the Ugaritic texts as the bull or bull El. So you've got this bovid imagery that's consistent. You've got you mentioned the bullmen. That's a demonic character that goes back to the Akkadian period in the the mid-3rd century BC, so 2200 BC, during the time of Sargon the Great and his descendants, Naram Sin. This imagery, and this gets back to the actual name of the Titans themselves. As scholar Amar Anus, the Estonian scholars, pointed out, the etymology of the Greek god, the name of the Greek gods, the Titans, the ones who were sent down to Tartarus, is derived from the name of the ancient Amorite tribe, the Ditanu or Tidanu, which scholars believe comes from the Akkadian word for bison. So you've got this bull imagery, these bull demons, the Kusaraku in Akkadian cosmology, the Minotaur in the Minoan civilization. This theme that seems to be running through all of this, and of course, if we go ahead.
I'm sorry. No. Go ahead, Derek. I'm sorry.
And bringing this back around to the giants, if in fact El, Kronos, Jupiter, Kumarbi, these elder gods who were sent to the underworld by the younger generation of gods, is just a twisted version of what happened on Mount Hermon when Yahweh, according to 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude, confined the angels who sinned, the angels who kept not their first estate, by chaining them in gloomy darkness until the judgment. Then Kronos, the leader of the Titans, may have been Semyaza, the leader of the Watchers, who descended on Mount Hermon and corrupted humanity by taking wives from the daughters of men and fathering the giants. And yet the memory of these older gods, could this be? I mean, this bovid imagery. Why in the ancient Sumerian cylinder seals and all of their iconography, all of their gods are shown wearing these helmets with multiple sets of horns?
I think I make no bones about being an old Earth creationist. I'm perfectly fine with an old Earth. I think, to my mind, it lines up fine with the biblical timeline. But I'm not an evolutionist, not a Darwinist at all. I just want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the imagery that's when we think of a bull, down here in Texas, we know our bull.
We got a few of them here in the.
I'm sure you do. It's basic Americana, right? We know cattle.
Yeah.
But these bulls are these rowdy, rambunctious, ferocious creatures. But the association of the bull, the kind of power and potency that these ancient, in fact, prehistoric peoples, if we're talking, if the events on Mount Hermon go back to prehistory, which I believe they do, the bovine that people were originally thinking about in terms of association with, the whatever name we want to give him, Kronos or El, whatever, may go back to not the kind of domesticated cattle that we know, but something called the aurochs.
Yes.
Which was a late Pleistocene, early Holocene wild cattle, and these things were huge,
big, really big. Yeah, and they were still around. Yeah. They were still around into the early historical period, the 3rd millennium BC.
That's right.
Yeah. So in the times,
that's why I say they were present in the Holocene, but they were certainly more abundant in the late Pleistocene with all the other. But it was one of the last megafauna. There are sites like Çatalhöyük in Turkey,
mm-hmm.
in which this imagery is prominent, and not just in the little temple complex that they have there, but these were symbols that people brought into their domestic sphere. They had these huge head renderings of these prehistoric cattle,
mm-hmm.
aurochs. So to my mind, I mean, this is the bovine that these people are associating with the older deities.
Yeah.
But
the average
from Britain to India, the symbol of this creature associated with these older gods. Say that 10 times fast.
Yeah.
It would be the aurochs in cultural memory.
Yeah, and the average size, based on skeletons that have been discovered, at the shoulder, your bull would run from about 61 to 71 inches. That's about 5'1" to 5'11" at the shoulder.
At the shoulder, that's right.
Yeah, so that's huge. We're talking about 1,500 pounds apiece, and in the late to middle Pleistocene, they're saying that these may have gone as much as 1.5 tons.
Yeah.
So,
lots of steak, lots of hamburger.
Assuming you could bring one of those suckers down, which clearly our ancestors did. Otherwise, they'd still be around. But anyway, that was that's the thought. So bison. I just said bison because aurochs is not something we're as familiar with. But right, that's the origin of the Akkadian word Ditanu, which was the name of this tribe, from which the Greeks got the name of their old gods. Now, do I believe the Canaanites and the Amorites who claimed descent, because the Amorite kings like Hammurabi claimed descent from this tribe, do they actually believe that they were descended from the Titans, the Watchers? Maybe they thought they were. I don't know that they physically actually were. I don't even go there in my book because there's no way to prove it or disprove it. But they thought they did, and that's kind of the point.
And that's important because that's the intellectual history there.
Right.
It's what I tell my students about Rome. When we're reading Livy or something, they're fascinated to learn that the first king of Rome was actually named Romulus, and you're probably looking at a mythologized real king, who, in my opinion, was, had this semi-divine nature.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, what was important about early Roman mythology to the Romans, and by way of analogy to other ancient peoples, is even if we can't prove some of these direct links, it's still crucial, in fact, still very important that these peoples believed it.
Right.
It was at the core of their very culture, their very existence. So,
and it's that belief.
There have to be nuggets of historicity there, even through the medium of mythology.
Right, and it's that belief that was the reason that God declared the Amorite or the Anakim, the Anakim and their related or allied Amorite tribesmen in the hill country of Judah and Israel, Karem, dedicated or devoted to destruction, because they were totally sold out to this idea that they were literally descended from these old gods. And as I found, and as I'm sure you found in your research, they were performing rituals, at least at Ugarit, which was about the time of 1200 BC, again, this time when the Sea Peoples were destroying everything. They were performing rituals to summon the spirits of these Rephaim, mentioned specifically in the text, the Rephaim, and the Council of the Datanu, the Council of the Titans, summoning them in necromancy rituals to bless their kings. So it's not
certainly. I mean, now we're doing the same thing with our techno-sorcery, whether you were talking about the Babylon workings or in my opinion, CERN, too. So
it's
I don't know where that came from. There's a footnote to that, but it seems to me to be the same kind of mechanism.
I like that. Techno-sorcery, techno-Gnosticism. Make a note of that.
We just trademarked that, by the
way. Thanks to technology, we can do that online.
That's right.
It's phenomenal, and the internet has made it a lot easier to do this type of research. There are tools out there and texts out there, academic papers available to us that years ago would have required physical travel to university libraries and hours of research of digging through physical texts, whereas now, thanks to electronic texts, scanned papers, and so forth that are searchable, we can go through this and do this much quicker. So it is a blessing, and maybe it's because time is growing short that God is making these tools available to us, but the influence of these people and what they believed, the Amorites, who really set the table for Near Eastern culture from the time of Abraham through the time of Jesus. I mean, this was driven home to me just the other night. I was working on the book and realized, wait a minute, why did Jesus ride a donkey into Jerusalem? Well, it's because in Amorite culture, and even though the Amorites hadn't been relevant, their descendants still were, the Phoenicians, the Arameans, the Arabs, the Chaldeans, but the Amorites themselves had kind of shuffled off out of history about the time of the Sea Peoples invasion. You don't find them mentioned anymore except in historical contexts. But in the Amorite culture of the 2nd and 1st millennium BC, kings did not ride horses. They weren't riding noble steeds like knights in shining armor. In fact, there's a text that was found from Mari, which was a kingdom on the Euphrates River that was destroyed by Hammurabi of Babylon around the time of Isaac and Jacob in the 18th century BC. And this court official is telling the king of Mari, my lord should honor his kingship by only riding in chariots or on donkeys. My lord should not ride on a horse. Okay. Donkeys were essentially a sacred animal to the Amorites. And so riding on a donkey and a donkey colt was actually, yes, it was Jesus showing humility, at least from our 21st century perspective. But in the context of the 1st century, where the influence of the Amorites was still remembered, it was a very clear signal. Hey, here comes the king.
Certainly.
So this is a thread influence that extends all the way through the Bible, and I know we've only scratched the surface here, but in the interest of trying to keep these to a manageable length, I don't want to go too much farther, or too much longer with this conversation. But the thing I'm finding is that this veneration of the dead, think Isaiah 14, the shades who rise up to greet the rebel from Eden as he is brought down to Sheol to become Lord of the dead. The importance of these necromancy rituals to the pagan neighbors of the Israelites. Not only were they summoning the Rephaim, the ancient kings of old, the men of renown, if you will, to refer back to Genesis 6, they had regular monthly rituals where they had to summon their ancestors through necromancy rituals to a meal. And if they didn't, the ancestor spirits would get mad and make life hell for them. This is really important, not only in the development of theology, but it's also plays a key role in Bible prophecy. At least that's the case I'm going to make in my forthcoming book.
And I would go further and say that those same rituals were transplanted in the diaspora of these giants when they became the gods of other civilizations, and you might say that they became exponentially hungry, especially when you look at the blood sacrifices of the Maya, the Aztec, the Toltec, and ostensibly the Olmec.
Okay, all right. So, in other words,
extremely bloodthirsty gods and ancestors.
Now here's another aspect of this. The god I didn't mention, who was most known for human sacrifice in the Bible anyway, is Molech. And, Molech. Yeah, Molech, who is in the Ugaritic texts equated with Rapayu, because they reign from the same two cities as Og of Bashan, Ashtaroth and Edrei. Rapayu's singular form of the word Rephaim. But that sacrificial aspect of his worship was transferred to the god of the Phoenicians, the chief god of the Phoenicians, Baal Hamon, especially at Carthage, but also the Tophets that were ascribed, the Tophet that was ascribed to Molech in the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, near Jerusalem, where the king Manasseh passed his child through the fire. Tophets have been found not just at Carthage in North Africa, but at sites on Sicily and Sardinia. We hope to visit one or two when we're in Sardinia in May with Steve Quayle and Timothy Alberino. But Baal Hamon, according to scholars, is equated with Saturn, with Kronos, and with El. So interestingly, now you've got this leader of the Watchers who, as part of his punishment, was not only chained in Tartarus, but had to watch the physical death of all of the children that the Watchers fathered on human women. And those are the spirits, according to the book of Enoch, who were condemned to wander the earth, not allowed in heaven, wander the earth until the judgment. So those demonic spirits are still with us. But the God who led this rebellion on Mount Hermon, now accepting the sacrifice of human children, as the Phoenicians spread westward in the first millennium BC, from Tyre to Carthage, Carthage to Spain and Sicily and Sardinia and other places in the Mediterranean. Could this be, and this is speculation, Judd, but is it possible that this God was demanding human sacrifice? And in the diaspora, if you extend that to the Americas and say, well, maybe that's the origin of the...
I believe so, and I think he's still maintaining residence in the good old USA.
Well, yeah, 60 million unborn.
Yeah, when you look at the number of abortions that are conducted on a daily basis, just in this country alone, I think it's pretty safe to say.
We turned it into an assembly line practice.
In terms of the ancient phases of American civilization, yes, both the Maya and the Aztec especially believed that it took human blood to feed the gods so that they would be placated enough to keep the natural cycles going, whether that was the movement of the sun or the planets and stars or, the weather. And it was, in the case of the Maya, and I won't dwell too long on this, but in the case of the Maya, they were killing off each other. For the longest time, the sort of harmonic convergence, hippie commune model of the Maya was the foregoing hypothesis in Mayan studies, but archaeology has since revealed that they were warring. The city-states warred against one another. They took each other as captives, and then offered the bulk of them up as sacrifices to Shark or Tlaloc or Kukulkan or a host of the other Mayan deities. The Aztec too, offered. I mean, they were fighting other tribes, but they offered, the same copious amounts of sacrifices throughout the course of the year. So, and the ones, I mean, it all breaks your heart to read about it, but the ones that really, really break my heart are the children, that were offered into these cenotes, these sinkholes that had filled in with water that the Maya used as water sources, but they were also thought to be openings to the underworld, the world of the god Xibalba,
to the abyss,
and the remnants of human children and infants have been found in these cenotes.
Yeah, you're right. Hippie commune type civilizations don't have walls built out of human skulls.
No.
Yeah. Well, it's there's an awful lot to dig into here, and I know we've only scratched the surface and kind of wandered around a bit, but that's kind of what we do when we talk. So you viewers and listeners, hope you follow along and appreciate the conversation as much as I enjoy talking to Judd, because we just bounce ideas back and forth, and I made a bunch of notes here while we're talking, things to make sure to go back and research and include in the book before I get this written. But
we're just talking here. We're just drinking coffee and drinking tea, and the rest of you are just along for the ride.
That's right. I've got tea here as I'm trying to get toward past the tail end of the cold here between last week and this week. But there's a lot of there, and the thing that is most amazing to me, Judd, is that this information, for the most part, has been available for the better part of the last 30 or 40 years to secular scholars. And yet they're either so close to the trees that they can't see the forest, or they're just not willing to look at this through a biblical lens and see how it relates to true cosmology. I mean, the one true cosmology that governs the world and the universe in which we live.
Well, and these are the kind of comparative mythological studies that give more insight to the biblical narrative, I think. And I'm gratified to see your work, everybody else's work in this field. We're all kind of bouncing off of each other, and we find out that we've been, the Holy Spirit's been leading us to work on similar projects, and we're confirming and corroborating. And so, I'm just excited to be alive in a time like this, where, like you say, we've got resources that we couldn't have dreamed of even 10, 20 years ago.
Right.
So, we're all producing, we're all in the field, we're all embedded, we're all producing, new intel all the time.
Yeah. Well, where will people be able to find the Nephilim Dossier, more ethno-historical materials on the ancient giants?
I should have that ready it should be ready in a couple of days, and it'll be on my bookstore site, the Lulu site, lulu.com, but it'll also be available on Amazon a couple of days after that. And I have a lot of stuff actually coming out this week as well. People can go to my sites, burtonbeyond.com, the Institute of Biblical Anthropology, TIOBA.org. They can go to my Twitter, Facebook, and get information on all this stuff. But I have a considerable amount of material. I have several anthologies that I'm going to be releasing, essays in history, essays in anthropology and archaeology, and 2 books which listeners will probably be more interested in, one in biblical studies and one in religious studies. I've also got a book on witchcraft coming out this week called The Book of the Grey.
Oh.
Which we probably could have made a whole other show out of.
Sure, yeah.
just some really what I hope will be edifying and helpful study materials to people. In some cases, these works are the product of years and years and years of research projects, and I've just had the opportunity to put the finishing touches on them and get them out. So there's going to be the word that I used with you, I think, was a big intel reveal. So there's going to be a lot of stuff. I've got a Bible almanac that I'm going to be putting out this week. So
very cool.
All kinds of study material for people. Much of it Nephilim Watcher related. Some of it more general in terms of the history and anthropology material. But my advice to people would be watch my sites, watch Twitter, watch Facebook. There's going to be a lot of stuff available for people. And actually, I've got a special right now. If folks have not read Interview with the Giant, for a limited time, I've got this available as an ebook for $4.99. And people can go to Payloads, PAYLOADZ.com, and look up Interview with the Giant. But that's not where I'm stopping, because I think this material is timely and it's important. And if you read off of your tablet or iPad or phone or whatever, this may be the venue that you want to use. I'll also be making available The Shepherd's Sling and my recent book on Paneas, Caesarea Philippi,
right?
Which is, again, pertinent to the story of the Watchers and the giants in Mount Hermon, the events at Mount Hermon,
right? And
the episode of Jesus coming to Caesarea Philippi. This stuff is going to be available for a steal. So, and I'm doing this because I believe this material is timely and important, and I want to make it easily accessible for folks to get a hold of it. So, it's almost euphemistic at this point to say that there's a lot of stuff coming out from Burton Beyond at the IBA these days. But just be watching, and thank you guys out there for all your support. I appreciate it. There's more coming out, so be watchful.
I will put the links in the notes, both at VFTB.net, or if you're watching this at YouTube, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. Just look below the video at the description, and you'll have links to all of these places where you can find Dr. Judd Burton's research and, of course, the latest, the Nephilim Dossier, more ethno-historical materials on the ancient giants. Judd, we don't do this often enough. This is a fascinating conversation, and we'll make a practice of doing this more than once a quarter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I owe Judd an apology because this program was originally supposed to be up a couple of weeks ago, but I had an opportunity to interview Dr. Timothy Furnish a couple of weeks back, and I thought that was time sensitive because of the recent declaration by Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey that Muslims needed to come together with a joint united military effort against Israel, and that seemed like that was relatively important to get address that right away. And then we had the conference in Dallas. I guess I did post a program that weekend, but then with Resurrection Sunday last weekend, this was delayed by a couple of weeks. So apologies to Judd, because it's been a little longer between the interview and this program than I thought. But bottom line is you'll find links to his website and his books, including the newest that we discussed during the program, in the show notes at VFTB.net. If you're watching this at YouTube, youtube.com/Derek Gilbert, you'll find the notes right below this. Couple of quick things to tell you about as we are preparing for our dance card getting really busy for the rest of 2018. Of course, Sharon and I are going to be gone the month of May in Israel and Rome, as we'll be on tour with Mike Heiser in the Holy Land, May 6th through the 16th or thereabouts, and then a few days, in Jordan, visiting sites there, and then from the 18th of May or 19th of May through the 26th of May, we'll be in Rome and then Sardinia with Steve Coyle and Timothy Alberino. We'll be filing video reports from the road as time and bandwidth allows, but no promises at this point. We just don't know how the schedule's going to shake out. This will be our first trip like this, so we're not quite sure how much access we're going to have to the internet and how much energy we're going to have at the end of any given day. So just be patient with us, but we'll also be posting a lot for Skywatch TV on this tour, because a lot of what we're going to see relates to the research that I'm putting into my forthcoming book, which, God willing, and if all plans hold, should be out by August. And I think it's going to be, well, I'm excited about the information that this book is going to contain. So a couple of conferences to tell you about. We are going to be at the Hear the Watchman Conference, Long Island, August 9th through 11th of 2018, August 9th through 11th, 2018. This will be an interesting event because it's going to include a tour of the Montauk facility. This is Camp Hero, the Air Force Base, now closed, at Montauk, Long Island, that has given rise to some modern myths that inspired the hit Netflix series Stranger Things, stories of research into parapsychological things, telekinesis, teleportation, mind control sorts of things. We're going to get a tour of that. This is an optional thing. There will be an additional ticket required, but a bus tour from the conference on Sunday afternoon will go to Montauk for that. But the speakers at this conference, again, just a wonderful lineup. Henry Groover, L.A. Marzulli, Dr. Michael Lake, Pastor Paul Begley, Russ Dizdar, Pastor Casper McLeod, Coach Dave Daubenmeier, who did a wonderful, wonderful presentation in Dallas. Pastor Carl Gallup's our good friend, and Sharon will be there with me. I'm honored to serve as the MC for this event, so we're looking forward to that. Information and registration online at hearthewatchmen.com. That's hearthewatchmen.com. Of course, you know about the upcoming conference in Branson, Missouri. That's the Transhumanism and the Hybrid Age Conference. That is True Legends, Steve Quayle, Timothy Alberino. Tom Horn will be speaking. Sharon will be one of the featured speakers, drawing on her experience as a molecular biologist to talk about, the dangers of transhumanism, the false promises of salvation through science. That is September 14th through the 16th of 2018. And that is selling out quickly. It is an amazing facility, the Mansion Theater there in Branson. So we hope we can see you for that September 14th through the 16th. Gen6.com is the place to go for information there, gen6.com. And then finally, another new conference that this will be our first time attending, the Southwest Radio Church Annual East Coast Prophecy Conference. This is coming up in May. And let's see if I can bring the information up quickly here, which I thought I had available, but I did not. There we go. October 18th through the 20th. October 18th through the 20th, I'll be speaking there. Sharon will be with me, of course. This is at the Wyndham Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, October 18th through the 20th. Tom Horn, Joe Horn, yours truly, Dr. Larry Spargimino, Dr. Bob Glaze from Southwest Radio Church, and you'll find information and registration at their website, swrc.com. That's SWRC for SouthwestRadioChurch.com. So, again, things are picking up very quickly, and hopefully we'll have another one to tell you about in the month of August coming up before too long, and look forward to that. That would be in Texas, but as soon as I get confirmation, I will pass that along. Join our weekly Bible study. That is the Gilbert House Fellowship. We post that every Sunday at gilberthouse.org. Gilberthouse.org. That's an audio study, about an hour long each week, as Sharon and I go through the Bible in chronological order. We're in the book of Ezekiel now, which is fascinating and has got many, many layers. Not just Ezekiel 38 and 39, not just Ezekiel's wheel in chapter 1 and chapter 10. There's a lot of stuff in between those chapters, and we're in the middle of trying to sort through it right now. You'll find all of our archives for free going back to Genesis 1:1 at gilberthouse.org. Please give us a like at Spreaker, at iTunes, at Facebook. We got a Facebook page for this program. It's facebook.com/View from the Bunker. We're online at Stitcher as well. You can give us a thumbs up there and a rating. And we remind you that A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and available from through a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 international license. The opening theme is by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. The closing the opening announcer, that is DC Good. The closing by, just generic stuff that I pulled off of GarageBand. So Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.